Good afternoon, Jeff. How are you doing today?
Hey, John, good. Nice to meet you, and thank you for having me.
No, thank you for giving us the time to talk about your three-part documentary, Before the End, Searching for Jim Morrison. Um, starting off the bat with the initial question. W- Being the fact that in the first episode you do explain that you are a major fan of Jim Morrison and his band. What inspired you to start this search and to as well document yourself in this whole venture to trying to see what happened or to find Jim Morrison?
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. I mean, honestly, I can give you the general answer. The core answer is I wanted to bring a deeper understanding, not just to Jim's alleged death, but then the death is like his rock stardom. It's a big, big topic, obviously, and it can tend to overshadow the nuances of his life and everything that would comprise it. Um, so yeah, I wanted to bring a deeper understanding to that. And as far as my documenting myself, as you said, as part of the process, um, that almost was sort of forced. It just had to be that way. When I first began the project 12 years ago, I was the last person that I wanted to narrate the project. I didn't even want to be on camera, to be frank. I was in touch with Henry Rollins, and he was actually very interested in being the narrator. I was reaching out to Patti Smith, Grace Slick, some of Jim's actual peers from the late '60s, early '70s, and Rollins obviously is a huge Morrison fan, and he was all on board. But as time went on, it just became almost like this vision quest, for lack of a better term. And an editor said, "This is your story, man. You've been studying this guy since you were 18 years old in 1985." He's like, "You have to tell it. I mean, no one else can tell this, And so that made sense. So I stepped it up there.
Okay, and being the fact, that's another thing that I wanted to ask. You started your journey or your investigation since you were 18 years old. What drove you to to follow this road into figuring out what happened to him or or what the what's and what's out of Jim Morrison? What who was Jeff, 18 years old? What drove him to do this journey?
That's a good question. Who the hell was he? I'm still trying to figure that one out myself. Aren't we all? But no, that's a great question. You know, I, it's really strange. I've discussed this with my girlfriend a million times, my good friends. It's like Jim. I don't want to get too mystical or anything. Because who knows? Who knows what it all means? Like, why are any of us really here? That's obviously giant. Those are giant existential questions. But for me personally, regarding this, I realized at one point that Morrison has been in my life from the jump, from almost day one. My mother showed me this photo years ago that was taken of me when I had just turned 2 years old, and it's me holding my cat, Siamese cat we had on a black leather chair. I remembered it. I said, "Oh, I remember that," And so we realized that was like my first conscious memory, and that was on the back of the photo is written in my mother's handwriting, 3/1/69. And I realized at one point, oh my God, that was taken the night of the Miami incident. When Jim was holding a lamb on stage in Miami, and so it's again, who knows what any of that means, if anything, but it's fascinating. He's been part of my trajectory from day one. You know.
Okay. And you mentioned that this took 12 years.
Yes.
Why did it took so long? Was it what were the challenges behind um this big time frame to bring this documentary to for the people like that they can see it, because I understand um documentaries don't take, and you can't, it's not like a feature film that you can film probably in 20 days or 2 months or less time frame. Documentaries are very different. But why did it take you 12 years to get everything together and then have this 3-part documentary?
Um, well, first of all, I'm a solo operation. I'm a one man band, if you will. I don't have big Hollywood backing, or I always say I'm not like Steven Spielberg. I'm not even like Michael Moore, And I have high respect for both of those guys, but that's like apples and oranges. I'm a true independent operator. I'm one dude working with hired freelancers, and so that in itself was partly why it took so long. But then there were all just the logistics of it. The getting together, the funding. That was, as I say, a glacial process that took a lot of time. And then there was just all the moving parts. I connected with over 1,000 people who knew Morrison in those 12 years. Um, and of those 1,000 plus, I interviewed about 130 of them on camera for the project. And that's a lot of heavy lifting. You're one person. I didn't even have an assistant. And I'm not complaining. There's no martyrdom here. I brought this on myself. I took it on, and I'm grateful for all of it. But yeah, it was really tough. It was hard to just find these people, to reach out to them and earn their trust and fly to see them or drive to meet them, interview them, and 130 people. I mean, it took, when you're just one man, one man band, it takes time.
No, yeah, I completely understand. I do this. I do have another like show that that even though I have a team, that we record constantly, but I'm the editor. I'm the one that brings all the information in. So yeah, I completely understand the whole one man army thing.
You know the drill. It's like they say when you run your own business, you're the CEO. You're the top enchilada, but you're
Yeah.
also who has to clean the toilets, and it's all falls to you. So there you have it.
And how difficult was it to find people that got to know Jim? Because we're talking about that Jim was part of the 60s, you know, um, there was no cell phones. Back in those times, there was all phone books, and everything should have been written if you wanted to like contact somebody. How difficult was to connect all of these people together and get to interview them?
That's interesting. That's a great question. And it reminds me that you know, I also have a companion book coming out called 127 Fascination, Jim Morrison Decoded, which is like a tie-in to Before the End, searching for Jim Morrison. So the doc and the book sort of, combine to work with each other.
Nice.
Um, and I thought of that because, to answer your question specifically, in 1996, I took, steps toward what later has become this book. Um, and that was in the very early internet days. I didn't even have a computer in 1996, let alone a cell phone.
I was
Late,
only 6 years old in 1996.
you were just a little nugget back then, and I was
Yeah.
29 years old. So I'm old enough to be your dad. But yeah, it was hard. It was hard to reach out to those people. I was like, where the hell do I even begin? um, but I started. One of the first people I tried to find was Robin Wordle, Jim's personal assistant in Paris, and she's like an enigma unto herself. She's almost as much of a phantom, in my opinion, as Jim is. And I tried to reach her back in 96, and it took me another 20 years, literally till 2016, to find her, because her name had been misspelled in all the Morrison biographies going back to No One Here Gets Out Alive. So that was its own rabbit hole. It was rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole, and it was fascinating, but it took a long time. Yeah.
Wow. And I just just in curiosity, at least for my understanding, and I love documentaries, and most documentaries are either 1 hour, 2 hour long, and it's just one full length feature film. What made you decide to divide it in three parts?
Oh, that's another great question. I always appreciate, original questioning, like thinking outside the standard questions, Um, yeah, that's kind of funny. When I first began the project in July of 2012, um, and this was right after I was trying to decide, do I do a Marilyn Monroe doc? Do I do an Andy Kaufman doc? Because I'm huge fans of both of them. Or do I do the topic I know the best, Jim Morrison? So obviously Jim won out. But in the early days, in the early going, I was just going to do what you had described. I was just going to do a standard, I don't know, hour and a half, 2 hour documentary, standalone,
Hmm.
single episode. And then it morphed and blew up, and just it was like a crazy roller coaster. And at one point, it was like a six-part. It was a six-parter because I shot so many interviews and so much footage. I mean, it could be honestly, it could be a 12-parter. It's incredible. So in the end, no pun intended, I realized, okay, I need to, I just got to do my best to condense it. And so I thought a three-part docu series, which I call a docu mystery, was the way to go, and I feel good about that.
And do you feel that with this three-part documentary, you got the narrative that you wanted, um, in regards to, how the title is Before the End, Searching for Jim Morrison? Do you feel that when you sat down and said, I'm done, I have my three-part documentary, and I imagine that you rewatched it once again, do you feel that the narrative that you wanted to bring to the people is there and that they will understand your passion, that you wanted to find Jim Morrison?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate it. Yeah, I do. I feel I'm proud of it. I'm proud of what I accomplished with this. Um, I took everything I had. I gave it everything I had. Physically, mentally, financially. So I am. I stand behind it, and I'm proud of it. You know, were there things I wish I could have, done differently? Of course. Like I wish it could be a six-parter or a 10-parter or a 12-part. Which is kind of crazy, but because I have all that footage and so much of it is just vital. But you have to make those hard choices, as a filmmaker. But that's where the book comes in. In the book, I keep telling everyone, I can get really granular. In the book, I can get really detailed, into those fine point details, that I couldn't get into the doc, because the doc is such a big thing, and I love it. But the book is like the flip side of that, where I can really zero in on the nuances of Jim's life and alleged death. And again, so important, Jim's formative years, his death or alleged death is such a big topic. I always say it's akin to his rock stardom. His rock stardom overshadowed his poetry the same way his alleged death overshadows his formative years. So, in other words, in both the doc and the book, and especially the book, I really get into Jim's formative years when he was a kid and a teenager and a college student. Like, what shaped him? Who impacted him? What drove him to create as if his very life depended on it? Because it did.
Okay. That's amazing. Actually, that was going to be my next question in regards to talk a little bit more about the book. But now going into that, you have the book. Is the book going to have like visuals, like some other biography books, that in certain chapters there's like pictures or probably documents or some other books that I have read. They usually use like the middle portion of like the book, dividing like chapters, like, oh, these are like the images that we want to present you in regards to what the book is about. Is that going to be added to the book, or is it only going to be all just your words and chapters?
The plan, I mean, the book is complete. I'm in the
Okay.
process right now, and just like I always say this, I'm a true independent. As I said, I'm a one-man operation, you know. I mean, that's truly independent in my book. Hollywood, you know, refers to independent movies or indie movies that have like a budget of $50 million. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem independent to me. But I don't know. Maybe I'm old school, you know. But yeah, same thing with my book. The book is truly an independent publication. I'm in the process right now of, meeting with literary agents who I'm also hope will have that independent spirit, you know. And then I have a short list of true, like independent publishers who are really fearless, you know, who have a real open mind and experimental heart, you know, who aren't afraid of unauthorized topics, because when everything is authorized, that means it's been sanitized
Hmm.
and photoshopped and airbrushed and CGI'd. And, you know, I want the fans, I know there's tons of them because they contact me all the time. They're just like me. I'm a fan and I want new information. You know, I don't want the same old narrative and the same old answers. I want new information about Jim and his life, you know.
Now that you mentioned that, I like I mentioned, I love any type of like film that talks about the past. Let it be a band, let it be a president or an event, or mostly the ones that I like dig in a little bit much more is African American like icons due to, you know, their story and how nit and gritty it is. My question for you is, being the fact that if it's authorized, something that you mentioned really interesting. When it's authorized, they try to, you know, block in the bad. What do you think when a film like Bohemian Rhapsody, you know, a lot of people, as myself, were expecting to see the nit and gritty of what actually happened to Freddie Mercury in his career, and you see that they didn't touch those topics, and you have to go to like other documentaries. What How do you feel about that when you want to see like, hey, this is what actually happened to this person? It was not always how do you call it, it was not always positive and nice, but you know, but we don't get to see it because it's been cleansed by I'm not gonna say Hollywood only, but I think you know what I mean. How do you feel about that when these certain topics, or when they put these character icons in a film or in a documentary, and they don't talk about like that portion or like that darkness that probably they went through? How do you feel about that?
Again, that's a great question, man. I appreciate it. No one's asked me that. I don't know what to say. No, I'm kidding. I've always got an answer. I've spent so damn long on this, you know. uh, that no, seriously though, that's awesome. You know, the first thing that jumps to mind, you know, as you were saying that, I love that you used the word cleanse, you know, because that's what they do. I mean, they whitewash it, you know, however you want to term it. Um, you know, even with regards to Jim's sexuality. I mean,
Hmm.
I recently learned a term called straightwashing, which I didn't know about, but that's what they've been doing for years. You know, it's like dance around on these eggshells in a passive aggressive manner. And it's like, we're all adults here. You know,
Hmm.
not exposing this to 5-year-old children, you know. um, like, let this guy be who he was, you know, whoever he was. And he said he wanted to try everything and he meant it, you know. Anyway, but I digress. So the thing that really jumped to mind was Oliver, you know, as you said, Freddie Mercury, Bohemian Rhapsody, which I saw. I thought it was great, but I also took it for what it was. It was a big, giant budget Hollywood slick, you know, biopic, you know, and I think it was great for what it was meant to be, in the same way that Oliver Stone did with his movie about Jim in 1991. And you know, I was the first in line to see that back in '91, and you know, personally, I was bummed out because I felt it was one dimensional and dark. I think it only showed the dark side of Jim. Not that that didn't exist, but it showed him as this dark, narcissistic abuser. And there was so much more to him. It's like, could they have at least shown him writing a poem or a song lyric, you know, or a tender moment? Because he was also a sensitive person, and you know, he had his gentle moments. He was kind. He was funny, you know. Um, but you know, that being said, I think Stone is a brilliant filmmaker. I think JFK is amazing, and other films he did. But I just felt like it wasn't his best showing with the Doors. But that's just my opinion. More power to him. He had his vision, and he went with it. But that's to answer your question. That's the trick with these Hollywood biopics. You're not going to get the granular details that you could get in the documentary. You know.
And if if you had the chance, but you mentioned Marilyn Monroe. I don't remember the other icon that you mentioned,
Oh,
but
Andy. Yeah.
yeah. So if what would be your next project? I know that you're working right now on having the book published and everything, but what would be Jeff's next step or next project?
Well, I keep joking about this when people ask me, and I always appreciate it. I just would like to take a 2 week vacation somewhere next to a beach, and or a pool, a swimming pool. That's honestly my priority in the new year. I just would finally. I haven't done that uh, forever. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a 2 week vacation, a full 2 week vacation. But um, beyond that, I have a short list of topics that are really near and dear to me. I don't want to, really go there right now in terms of specifics. I will say, as much as I wanted to do one about Andy Kaufman, and you should check him out if you weren't aware, he was like the Harry Houdini of comedy.
Okay.
He's people tease me good naturedly, and even my own friends and family. They're like, you think everyone faked their death, don't you, Jeff? And I go, oh no, just Jim Morrison and Andy Kaufman, just those two, because they both talked about it. They both talked about doing it. And I think if Jim did it, he did it as honestly just pure, unadulterated escape, you know, to begin anew. And whereas with Kaufman, if he did it, I think Kaufman did it as his final performance art because he was more of a performance artist than a comedian, in my opinion. So anyway, we'll see. But yeah, as far as my next documentary, the jury's still out.
Okay. And in terms of your vacation, you should pass by my small island in Puerto Rico. There's beaches, there's pools, you have the whole niner over
Listen
here,
out,
over
man.
here.
Can we do it now? Look at my watch if I were wearing a watch.
And Jeff, going, let me see if I can get back to the question I had in my mind. Um, if there we go. What memory, out of these 12 years that you've been grabbing footage, doing interviews, what memory, takes you always back? Like when I did this, this is what I always mention when I talk about my documentary. What is that memory?
Oh, you mean just like memories that really stand out in
Yeah.
general during the making of the process?
Hmm.
Oh wow. I mean, so many. It was an honor to meet all of those people who were connected to Jim. Especially the on-camera interviews, like people who really knew him. Um, but that was its own fascinating process, and I'll always be grateful for that. But as far as distinct, specific memories, um, I've said that many times. Meeting Jim's sister Anne was, mind blowing, and meeting his brother Andy, mind blowing. Andy obviously did the interview. He's in the docu series, the docu mystery. He told me at that time when I met him in October of 2012, he let me stay at his home. He insisted, actually. I was such a nice guy. And so that was surreal, in the best sense of the word. And then he said that, yours is the first on camera interview I've ever done, and it's going to be the only one. And I went, whoa, okay, that was pretty cool. And then meeting Ann Morrison Tuning, I met her in March of 2013 after I interviewed Andy. And we had this lovely, almost 4 hour meeting. And then afterwards, we were joking about how shy she is. And that's why she ultimately didn't do an interview, but she was so kind. Um, and she hugged me. She walked me to her driveway and she hugged me goodbye. And I'll never forget this. She said, I'm so glad you're making your documentary because I want the world to know there was more to my brother than, and then she went like this and she went, the Lizard King with the air quotes. And, that's something I'll always have to take with me. It was just such an amazing moment, and I told her that's exactly why I'm doing this, to show Jim not as the rock star, not as the rock god, not as the Lizard King, Mr. Mojo Rising, like the person, the human being, who is this guy? Like, really, a
Yeah,
deeper understanding of him.
that's amazing. So, Jeff, this would be my final question for you. If you could describe your documentary before the end, searching for Jim Morrison, in one word, what would it be?
Oh man. Well, I call it a docu-mystery, so that's probably the best word. And then if I could cheat a little and use two words, I would call it rabbit hole. It's just like real life rabbit holes. They go
Yeah,
down to the rabbit warren, and then as you get down there, there are other rabbit holes. It's like Alice in Wonderland. There's
yeah,
not one rabbit hole. Those rabbit hole, that first rabbit hole leads to other rabbit holes. It leads to other, and it's like a maze. It's like a labyrinth, and that labyrinth is what underpinned and created this journey. And it's been absolutely fascinating. I'm grateful for all of it.
that's amazing. Jeff, thank you very much for giving us the time to talk about the documentary. And I hope everybody goes down the rabbit hole and see if they get inspired to make their own, mystery documentary. But thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. Bye bye.